Welcome aboard, all Senior 6 students doing history on the radio learning program Ready to Learn, produced by Rwanda Education Board with support from UNICEF Rwanda in collaboration with Inspire, Educate and Empower Rwanda. I am your teacher. I'm Teacher Charles. We are going to be together in this radio learning lesson, which I hope you are going to enjoy it. Alright, thank you so much. I hope you are getting close to your radios. Tune in for this lesson. All Senior 6 students offering history. We are having a wonderful lesson that we are going to build from the previous lesson we had. Our previous lesson was about manifestations of neo-colonialism. Manifestations of neo-colonialism in Africa. So our today's lesson is about the consequences of neo-colonialism. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to discuss the consequences of neo-colonialism. Alright, the fact that you are going to discuss at each point that we discuss here, I want you to expand it with your own words so that you can discuss about it, you can get to understand it more. Before we get into the consequences of neocolonialism, I hope you still remember the meaning of neocolonialism. We talked about it in detail. We talked about the indicators of neocolonialism in Africa. So today, we are going to be looking at the consequences, the effects, the impact. All those words mean the same. They mean one. Of neocolonialism. Before we go on with the consequences, I want you to first listen to this statement from Kwame Nkrumah, the former president of Ghana. This is what he said about neocolonialism. He said that neocolonialism is the worst form of imperialism. For those who practice it, it ensures power without responsibility and unchecked exploitation. Implement unchecked exploitation for those who suffer from it. He continued that neocolonialism is implemented in the political, economic, and cultural spheres of society. It is difficult to provide an objective evaluation of the specific effects of the neocolonialism in Africa because the debate among analysts is still going on. That is what Kwame Nkrumah, the former president of Ghana, said about neocolonialism, that it is implemented in political, economic, and social spheres. And with this, that is how we are going to look at it. We are going to look at how neocolonialism affects Africa's politics, economy, or economics, social cultural spheres. Basically, we are going to be looking at how neocolonialism affected and is still affecting Africa's politics, economics, social cultural spheres. I encourage you to listen attentively as you take notes in your notebooks. Let's begin with economic consequences. Neocolonialism poses a serious danger to the evolution of the continent, whereby some African leaders have totally been unable to change the colonial economic legacy in the new independent states. All right, that neocolonialism poses a serious danger to the evolution of the continent. When the continent, we are meaning African continent, because we are looking at the consequences of neocolonialism in Africa, whereby some African leaders have totally been unable to change the colonial economic legacy, meaning that African leaders have failed to adopt suitable economic strategies or political strategies for their states. They have taken up what the imperialists brought. They have failed to change. That is what it means, the legacy. Meaning what the colonials brought or are still bringing to African continent is still being embraced by some of African leaders. So that is a consequence, that Africa is still driven on the economic legacy of the imperialists or of the colonialists. All right, let's go on. I'm still explaining on this. They have made economic choices which undermine the potential for economic growth and at worst destroy significant areas of commercial activities. All right, dear students, I hope you are summarizing, you are taking notes in your notebooks, that with this point of economic consequence, whereby that African leaders have continued to embrace the economic legacy of the colonialists, that they have failed to provide, you get that one, that they have failed to make economic choices that are relevant to their economies, because they still embrace and use or even implement what the colonialists brought. All right? I hope you are getting that one. I want, with this point, you to summarize and make key points out of it, make key economic consequences, and summarize them in your notebooks. Because African leaders have failed to adopt and use relevant and reasonable economic choices that are relevant to their states, because they still make choices which undermine the potential for economic growth, at the worst destroy significant areas of commercial activities. All right, let's go on. Thank you so much for listening in. I hope you are ready and you are summarizing major points out of this. The industrialization models, that is another point. The industrialization models followed by low developing countries, in other words, followed by African states, because African states are still developing, they are still regarded as developing countries. So the industrialization models followed by the low developing countries, which are applied by the Europeans and Americans, have failed. That African states that they are still trying to follow the industrialization models brought by Europeans and Americans, they have totally failed. Why do you think that African states have failed to adopt to the industrialization models brought by Europeans and Americans? The answer is simple. Because most of them are not relevant to African economies. They are not used to them. So they fail to implement them because they have other strings attached. As you are going to hear from this explanation. All right? I'm continuing on this point, that projects are not well elaborated, Some are created for prestige, some are expensive and inefficient, depending on loans, external experts, and imported technologies. So those are some of the reasons, some of the strings that make these industrialization models fail in Africa, because they are attached, there are loans attached to them. So when Americans and Europeans bring their models of industrialization to Africa, they want to attach them with loans that they give Africans, loans of which loans are very high, and the interest rate charged is also high. So it makes them fail, because some Africans will not manage. That even they want to begin with external experts, that if Africans are to implement or to start up industrialization, that they need to employ external experts from Europe. So they still want Africans, when they are industrializing, they are putting up industries, they even employ experts from Europe. That is also another sign, another indicator. That is also a consequence of neo-colonialism. That even they want Africans to import new technologies, of which that technology or new technologies are brought or are imported from Europe and America. You can see how neo-colonialism is still affecting Africa. That if we are to start up industries, we need to import new technologies, we need to import experts from Europe and America, and even to start up those industries, we need to borrow, we need to get loans from Americans and Europeans, of which all are not affordable to African context. So it is a consequence. With industrialization models, Africans have completely failed to implement them because there are strings attached. We have seen loans, we have seen experts, we have seen new technologies, all to be imported or to be acquired from America and Europe. Hence a consequence of neo-colonialism. So the fact that they colonized Africa, what they started with, and after the independence, they still want Africans to depend on them through loans, technologies, experts. All right. I hope you are taking notes. I hope you are summarizing. Let's go on. I still encourage you to listen attentively as you take notes. Listen to this one. The World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and other multilateral organizations have taken this opportunity to control African economies. They lend loans to African states with hard conditions and high interest rates. This has created the debt crisis. So the consequence here is about loans, how neo-colonialism has brought to African states, that African states are still dependent on European and American loans, that African states, they are independent in brackets because the Europeans still want to influence them through loans, through giving them loans, of which loans are very hard for Africans to pay back with high interests. So the issue here is about loans through IMF, that is International Monetary Fund, and World Bank. All right. I'm still giving an example of this economic consequence. Another example of the critical reality faced by African countries is related to the unfair exchange. The consequence here is about unfair trade exchange. Unfair trade exchange. Much as African states are conducting or carrying out trade with Europeans and Americans, but the terms are unfair. The conditions are unfair. So let's see how unfair trade exchange is a consequence of neo-colonialism in Africa. I'm giving a short and a simple example here for you to understand more about unfair trade exchange. That according to a recent research on African economy, the diamond mined in Africa costs about $40 per carat. Carat is a unit of measurement for gold. Like we say, beans are measured in kilograms. You get it there? So carat is a unit of measurement. That about $40 per carat. And a diamond cut and polished in Europe increases to $400 per carat. That in Africa, they get it at 40. But in America, in Europe, it is at 400. You can get that difference. I'm still continuing. The same stone's price is around $900 per carat when it reaches the consumer, when it reaches the final consumer. So you can get it. In Africa, it is at 40. Then in Europe, when it is at the final destination, at the consumer, who will consume, who will use it, it is at 900. You can get now that difference, 940. A very big and a very wide difference. So that demonstrates unfair trade terms, unfair trade exchange. So Africans are still cheated on exchange rates. Things are acquired in Africa at the lowest price, and they reach at the final consumer in Europe at the highest price. Meaning if that highest price is provided or is given to Africans, Africans would also be much better. Why? Because the technology is still up, is still in Europe and America, where they polish and clean up all those raw materials to final products. That was the point. Unfair exchange. All right. Thank you so much. I hope you're getting this. Let's look at now this point about political consequences. That new independent countries have not only inherited European laws, but also the institutions of colonial bureaucracies. African states are subjected to the colonial laws and regulations that Africa has witnessed this. Much as colonialism ended, but it left behind neo-colonialism, which is still affecting Africa politically, economically, and socially. So under political here, we are saying that new independent African countries have not only inherited European laws, but also the institutions of colonial bureaucracies. That African states are run on bureaucracies, so they have institutions, not only laws, the institutions that African states have are the same as the institutions in Europe and America. But the difference is how Africans run them. It is totally different from how the Europeans and Americans run their own institutions, because for them, they are aware of their institutions. They know them. They know how to run them. They know how to play around them. But with Africa, it is hard. They were just brought to Africans, and Africans were told to manage. They were asked to implement. They were asked to carry out their political activities, following their rules, following their laws, regulations, and institutions. So this has subjected Africans to colonial laws, to colonial bureaucracies, and regulations. I hope you are getting the point now. So the point is about colonial bureaucracies, laws, and constitutions and institutions. So all these that African states are doing or are embracing, they are from Americans and Europeans. So they are neo-colonialist manifestations. So it is a consequence that we still embrace what was brought by the colonialists, that Africans still practice what was brought by colonialism. Let's go on. I hope you are writing down the notes. All right, let's get to this point. That African countries have remained dependent on their former colonial masters in decision making. So the point here is about decision making, that African states have remained dependent, they still depend on colonial masters' decisions. So they are driven by decisions made by colonial masters. So the point is about decision making. For example, during elections and the forms of government, in some circumstances, these countries cannot make their own decisions without the acknowledgement of their former colonial masters. They have always been present, for example, during elections as international observers, as well as supporting multi-party systems in the disguise of democracy. You are getting this point, that during elections in Africa, Africa has always witnessed international observers. Who are those observers? From Europe, from America, that they come to observe how elections are conducted and are done in Africa. Isn't that one a consequence of neo-colonialism? That in the disguise of democracy, that they want multi-party systems in Africa to disguise as democracy. They want us to understand what democracy is also questionable. So when we talk of decision making, that Europeans and Americans have always influenced the decisions of Africans, mostly African leaders. They want to infiltrate their ideas into African leaders so that they can practice what they want. All right, I hope the point is understood. The point is about decision making, so that African states are still dependent on colonialists or colonial masters' decision making. Good, thank you so much. I hope you are taking notes. So I want to give you 20 seconds. Think about a few points that we have mentioned. Think about them, because we have said by the end you will be able to discuss the consequences or the effects of neo-colonialism in Africa. So I want you in 20 seconds, think about that one point about decision making and see how it is affecting African countries when Africans still depend on colonial masters. 20 seconds. All right, thank you so much. Let's go to social cultural consequences. Social cultural consequences. So we want to see how neo-colonialism has influenced the social cultural lifestyles of Africans. So here the point is about influence on African cultures. Influence on African cultures. That neo-colonialism has led to the elimination of various cultures, worldviews, and beliefs. African languages, for example, have been replaced by European languages, that Africans have adopted European languages at the expense of their languages, their African languages. This has been achieved through violence or by soft means, such as modern schools and Christian religions. Through Christian religions and schools, Africans have learned the European languages have adopted to European languages at the expense of their mother languages. Yeah, this is a consequence. We are now embracing the colonial languages at the expense of African languages. The dressing code or the dressing style, we have changed from dressing code of our culture to the European styles of dressing. We are adopting the fashions and styles from colonialists. Even the names, look at the names. Yes, we have named ourselves, our children and our people, the European names at the expense of our African names. We look at our African names as backwards. Yes, that is a consequence. And we are embracing the European names. The language has gone, not only. There are very many examples that we can look at. Even look at families, that we are leaving extended family to the nuclear family. So we are looking at the nuclear family as a new trend. Yes, there is this one also, the appearance of the phenomenon of children of single parents. We have seen this, we have witnessed this, single parenthood. Single parents, where people don't mind if she's a lady and she's okay with staying alone and she produces, don't ask me more, but that is it. So she gets this as okay because we are adopting it from the colonialists. Because we have heard of them, that for them, they embrace this one, single parenthood. Single parents, where it's just a single parent with her or his children. So that is also another sign of neo-colonialism. We go on with that. Since then, the trend of cultural westernization has become very prevalent in Africa, that we are adopting to Western cultures, at the expense of African cultures. Western civilization has taken precedence over African values and culture, and the latter is considered as inferior to the former, especially by local elites and young generation. Yes, that young generation and the elite class are looking at the African values and culture as inferior, as backward, and looking at the Western cultures as modern. I hope you are getting it now, that Africa continues to face the problem of the dominant presence of Western civilization. That African continues to face the problem of the dominant presence of Western civilization. In the quest for modernization, the focus is mostly on the Western world, and there is little or no focus on the urgent need for internal changes in this quest. All right, that we are looking at Western civilization as the way to go. That if we are looking for modernization, we feel, we know it is through Western civilization that there is modernity. For modernization, we still look up to Western civilization at the expense of African. So we look at the Western values, Western practices, Western technologies, Western behaviors. Then we feel that is where modernity comes from. That is a consequence of neo-colonialism in Africa. There are very many consequences that we have in Africa brought by neo-colonialism. We've looked at language, we've looked at behavior, we've looked at marriages, we've looked at politics, where in decision making, most in elections, in choosing the leader. We've looked at the democracy models that Europeans want Africans to adopt. We've looked at industrialization models. We've looked at loans. We've looked at the unfair exchange terms. all those are consequences of neocolonialism that we are still embracing. We've looked at education, all that we learn. Some are to make Africans inferior to Western countries. So meaning there are very many consequences that Africa has witnessed brought by neocolonialism. You still have room with the questions that I'm going to give you to carry out a thorough research about neocolonialism so you can get more understanding of this. You understand the consequences. You will get more consequences that neocolonialism has brought to Africa. All right, thank you so much. Our today's lesson was about the consequences or the effects or the impact of neocolonialism. What neocolonialism brought to Africa or is still bringing, because we still live with neocolonialism in Africa. Looking at the manifestations or indicators that we looked at previously, they will help you to now get more consequences of neocolonialism. When we look at the manifestations of neocolonialism, they will help you to expand more on the consequences of neocolonialism to these that we have looked at today. We have looked at consequences under political, under economic, under social cultural spheres. Very many things have drastically changed in Africa. In politics, when we are to choose our own leaders, we are influenced. That is politics. Social life, eating habits, dressing styles have drastically changed, or that is neocolonialism. Languages have changed. We have adopted to Western languages, or that is neocolonialism. The practices, farming practices that we do. Thank you so much, dear students, for listening in. Thank you so much for being attentive and taking notes. I hope you summarized key points in your notebooks. So I want you to add this question or this activity for practice. It will help you understand more about the consequences of neocolonialism in Africa. The question is, discuss the indicators and effects of Western civilization on Africans. Discuss the indicators and effects of Western civilization on Africans and suggest possible ways how you would employ them for development of Africa and the world at large. That you discuss the indicators of Western civilization. After discussing those indicators of Western civilization, come up with possible ways how you would employ, in other words, how you would use them for development of Africa and the world at large. So after discussing, putting down the indicators of Western civilization, now suggest the possible ways how you would use those indicators of Western civilization to develop Africa and the world at large. Thank you so much for listening in. Bye-bye. It was your teacher, Teacher Charles. See you soon with another lesson. Thank you so much. Bye.